The morning Calloway walked out of St. Michael's Hospital with a box of his belongings and a termination letter still warm from the printer, the sky over Halifax was the color of old ash. He hadn't been fired for incompetence. Everyone who knew Calloway knew that. He'd been fired because he'd refused to sign off on a billing code that would have overcharged 43 elderly patients on fixed incomes, and the hospital administrator who handed him the letter had the nerve to call it a restructuring decision. Calloway set the box down on the front steps, looked at the envelope, then looked at the parking lot where his 11-year-old daughter Iris was sitting in the passenger seat of his Subaru, nose pressed against the window watching him. He picked the box back up. He walked to the car. He didn't let her see his face until he had a reason to smile. He didn't find one for 3 weeks. Calloway Reeves was 41 years old. He'd spent 17 of those years as a hospital administrator, the kind who actually walked the floors, knew the nurses by name, remembered which patients had nobody coming to visit on Sundays. He'd done the job because it mattered, and for a long time that had been enough. His wife, Moira, had died 4 years earlier. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late gone fast, and since then it had been just him and Iris in the house in Dartmouth, making Sunday pancakes and watching too much hockey and figuring out, one day at a time, what a family of 2 was supposed to look like. He wasn't broke. Not yet. He had savings, a modest pension contribution, and a house with a mortgage he could service for maybe 6 months on reserves before things got uncomfortable. But the job market for healthcare administrators in Nova Scotia was exactly as small as it sounded, and every application he sent disappeared into silence. 3 weeks after the termination, on a Tuesday afternoon in early November, he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Calloway Reeves?" Professional. Not warm but not cold, the kind of voice that had learned long ago not to waste itself on pleasantries. "It is. I'm calling on behalf of Nathalie Beaumont-Ferrara. She'd like to meet with you. Thursday noon. The Garrison in downtown Halifax. She'll cover lunch." Calloway looked at the stack of unanswered job applications on his kitchen table. "Can I ask what this is about?" A brief pause. Ms. Beaumont-Ferrara prefers to explain in person. He said yes before he even decided to. He'd heard the name Nathalie Beaumont-Ferrara the way most Haligonians had, in passing, attached to headlines. She was 47, the founder and CEO of Ferrara Health Solutions, which had grown from a single outpatient clinic in Moncton into a network of 17 private health facilities across Atlantic Canada and Quebec. She was also, according to a profile in Maclean's 2 years earlier, the most quietly powerful woman in Canadian healthcare who refuses to explain herself to anyone. The photograph in that article showed a woman standing in front of floor-to-soiling windows with the Halifax waterfront behind her, dark hair, sharp jaw, a suit that cost more than most people's rent. She was not smiling. She looked like someone who had decided at some point that she didn't need to perform warmth for cameras. Calloway had read that profile at the time and thought, good for her. He hadn't thought about it again. When she walked into the Garrison on Thursday, he recognized her immediately, though she looked different in person, slightly less armored, somehow. She wore a charcoal blazer and her hair was pulled back, and she sat across from him without any preamble. No handshake, no how do you do, no explanation of who she was, because she assumed he already knew. Which he did. "You refused to falsify billing codes at St. Michael's," she said, before the water glasses were even filled. "I refused to approve inaccurate billing, yes, and they fired you for it." They called it restructuring. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. More like a person who has caught someone telling the truth and is deciding what to do with it. "I've had 3 administrators resign from my network in the last 14 months, she said. 2 were poached by competitors. 1 had a family emergency that took her out of province. I've interviewed 11 candidates to fill the gaps. None of them made it past the 3rd week." She paused. "Do you know why I'm telling you this? Because you want me to be candidate 12? No," she said. "Because I want you to understand what you'd be walking into before I ask you something you might not be comfortable with." He waited. He'd learned in 17 years of managing people that silence was the most useful tool in any conversation. Nathalie folded her hands on the table. "I need someone to manage operational oversight across my 3 Halifax facilities. The role exists. The salary is competitive. But there's a second piece that I haven't advertised, and it's the piece I need to explain to you directly." The waiter came. They both ordered coffee, and neither of them looked at the menu. "I've been dealing with a legal challenge," she said after the waiter left. "A former business partner, a man named Gervais, has been quietly building a case against my fitness to run the organization. He claims mismanagement, ethical violations, conflicts of interest. Most of it is fabricated or distorted. But some of it is being weaponized against a provision in my original incorporation agreement that ties majority control of Ferrara Health to my personal standing as a— She said the next word like it cost her something— stable primary stakeholder. The board is nervous. My investors are watching. Calloway said, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure what it has to do with me. Gervais's legal team has also filed a separate motion challenging my custody of my nephew, Theo, she said. He's been in my care for 6 years. His parents, my brother and sister-in-law, were killed in a highway accident outside of Fredericton when Theo was 4. I've raised him since. And now Gervais, who has never once spoken to my nephew, is arguing that my schedule, my travel, her jaw tightened. My single status makes me an unstable guardian. He's found a sympathetic family court evaluator and a clause somewhere in the provincial guidelines, and he has enough money to make noise until someone listens. She picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking. The family court evaluation is in 4 months, she said. During that evaluation period, the assessor will make several unannounced home visits. They'll interview Theo. They'll speak to household staff, to teachers, to neighbors, and they will be looking, in part, at the stability and composition of the home environment. She looked at him directly. I don't need a husband, Mr. Reeves. I want to be very clear about that. But I do need someone the evaluator reads as a stable presence in that household. A professional I trust. Someone with a background that speaks for itself. Someone who isn't performing anything, because the moment this looks like a performance, it falls apart. The dining room hummed around them. Somewhere across the room, 2 people were celebrating something with champagne. You want me to move in, Calloway said. I want you to take the administrator role legitimately on contract with full compensation. The position is real. The work is real. You'd be managing 3 facilities and reporting directly to me. She paused. But I'd also need you and your daughter, if you're willing, to be present in my home during the evaluation period. Separate rooms. Complete transparency about the arrangement to my legal team. Nothing that isn't true, except that we're not together. Except that, she said quietly. He should have said no. Any reasonable person would have said no. He had a daughter to think about, a reputation to protect, and about 17 good reasons why entangling himself in a stranger's legal battle was not how a 41-year-old man who'd just lost his job was supposed to rebuild his life. He thought about Iris, sitting in the passenger seat 3 weeks ago, watching him through the windshield. He thought about the 43 elderly patients whose bills had been quietly corrected after he'd been let go, because another administrator had found the discrepancy and the hospital couldn't risk the paper trail. He thought about 17 years of doing the right thing and what it had cost him, and whether doing the right thing now might for once be the thing that also made sense. I need to think about it, he said. She gave him 48 hours. She didn't say take your time. She said 48 hours, and he believed she meant it. He told Iris that night. Not the whole thing, she was 11, not 30, but enough. He told her there was a job opportunity with a woman who ran hospitals, that the job was real and good, and that part of it would mean staying at her house for a few months while some complicated legal things got sorted out. He told her they'd have their own rooms. He told her the house was in the South End, near the water. Iris looked at him over her macaroni for a long moment. Is she nice? I don't know yet. Is the house nice? I genuinely don't know that either. Okay. She went back to her macaroni. I want to bring my loom, that was Iris. The loom came everywhere. He called Nathalie the next morning and said yes. Nathalie Beaumont-Ferrara's house on Fenwick Street was a 3-story heritage property with a dark green door and a view of the Northwest Arm that Calloway suspected cost more than his entire career had earned him. It was beautiful and it was immaculate, and when they arrived on a Saturday morning in mid-November with 2 cars of luggage, a 12-year-old tabby cat named Gilbert and Iris's loom strapped improbably to the roof rack. The house looked exactly like what it was, a place that had been decorated with great taste and very little noise. Theo appeared at the top of the front steps. He was 10 years old and small for his age, with his aunt's dark eyes and a wariness about him that Calloway recognized immediately. It was the wariness of a child who had learned to read rooms before walking into them, who had spent years quietly calculating the emotional weather of every adult space. Because when the adults in your life disappear suddenly, you learn fast that the world is not guaranteed. Hi, he said. Hi, said Iris. They regarded each other. Then Iris said, do you have a TV in your room? Yeah, do you have a Nintendo? Switch. Okay, said Iris, we can be friends. Calloway glanced at Nathalie, who was standing just inside the doorway. She was watching Theo with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before, soft at the edges, cautious, like someone who loved something very much and had learned to be afraid of how much it could hurt. She caught him looking. Her face went neutral again. "Dinner's at 7, she said, and went back inside. The arrangement was, on paper, functional. Calloway managed the 3 Halifax facilities with the same methodical attention he'd brought to every job in his career. He was good at it, the kind of good that comes from actually caring about the outcome rather than the optics, which made him unusual enough in his field that Nathalie's senior staff noticed within the first week. He had a meeting with the head nurse at the Bedford Road Clinic who'd been fighting for a better shift rotation for 8 months. He had it resolved in 12 days. The nurse sent him a card. He put it on the desk in his borrowed office and didn't think much of it, but Nathalie noticed. She noticed a lot of things quietly. That was, Calloway was beginning to understand, her primary mode of operating. At home, they were careful, polite. They shared a kitchen in the mornings, and there was a rhythm to it. She made espresso. He made actual amounts of food, and sometimes they talked about work, and sometimes they talked about nothing. He learned that she read on the back porch even in November. Wrapped in a blanket like stubbornness was its own form of insulation. She learned that he put music on when he cooked, always something with strings, and that he never explained why. The children were the easiest part. Iris brought her loom to Theo's room by the second weekend, and within a month they had developed an ecosystem of private jokes and collaborative projects that neither adult was fully invited into. Theo laughed more. He was still watchful, still careful, but there were evenings now where he'd sit on the kitchen counter while Calloway made dinner and just talk. About school, about hockey, about a book he'd read, about nothing in particular. Just talk. One evening in December, Theo asked, "Did your wife die?" Calloway set down the knife. "She did, yeah. 4 years ago." Theo was quiet for a moment. "My parents died too. I know, your aunt told me." "It's different," Theo said, "than people think. Everyone expects you to be sad all the time. But mostly it's just," he searched for the word, strange. Like something's missing that you can't remember the exact shape of anymore. Calloway looked at this 10-year-old boy sitting on his aunt's kitchen counter and thought that was one of the most precisely true things anyone had said to him in years. "Yeah," he said, "that's exactly what it is." The first unannounced home visit happened on a Thursday afternoon in January. The family court evaluator was a woman named Dr. Poulin, efficient, sharp-eyed, carrying a clipboard and the professional warmth of someone who'd learned to calibrate it carefully. She arrived at 3:45, which was, as it happened, the exact moment that Iris was in the living room teaching Theo to set up her loom, while Gilbert the cat attempted to eat the yarn, and Calloway was in the kitchen making a late lunch, and Nathalie was at the dining table, on a call she cut short the moment she heard the doorbell. Nothing about the scene had been arranged. The mess on the living room floor was real. The argument Iris and Theo were having about the correct tension for the warp thread was real. The half-eaten bowl of clementines on the coffee table was real, Dr. Poulin took it all in without expression, made several notes, and spent 20 minutes speaking with Theo in the living room, while Calloway and Nathalie stood in the kitchen and didn't quite look at each other. After she left, Theo came into the kitchen and said, "She asked me if I was happy here." Neither adult spoke. "I told her yes," he said, "because I am." He got himself a glass of water and went back upstairs. Nathalie stood very still for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and went back to work. Calloway started cleaning up the kitchen, and he thought, some things are not performances. Gervais, whose full name was Gervais Peltier, and who had been Nathalie's business partner for the first 7 years of Ferrara Health before she bought him out, had not given up. He'd escalated his legal challenge in February, adding 2 new allegations sourced from a former employee he'd apparently compensated quite generously for their cooperation. The allegations were thin, but they were designed to be expensive and exhausting, to force Nathalie into a defensive posture that would either drain her resources or create the appearance of instability the board was already worried about. One financial column ran a piece titled "The Ferrara Question: Leadership Under Pressure." Another published an anonymous quote suggesting the board was considering options. Nathalie read both articles and said nothing at work. She read them again at home at midnight, sitting in the kitchen in the dark, and she thought she was alone. She was not. Calloway came downstairs for water and found her there. He didn't say anything clever. He didn't tell her it would be fine because he didn't know that it would be, and she was not the kind of person who benefited from being told comfortable lies. He filled 2 glasses of water, set one in front of her, and sat down across the table. "He did this before," she said, without looking up from the article. "Not the legal attack, but the strategy of it. When I was first trying to get the network off the ground, he found every pressure point. Investors I was about to close, he'd call them first. Board positions I was building relationships toward, he'd plant a story. Not enough to destroy. Just enough to delay. She finally looked up. He's very good at wearing people down. I know, Calloway said. She looked at him. Not as a question, just looked. My hospital didn't fire me because they wanted to restructure, he said. They fired me because the administrator above me had been approving inflated billing codes for almost 3 years, and I'd found the discrepancy and started asking questions, and it was easier to let me go than to address what I'd found. The man who approved those codes is still there. He got a promotion in October. Nathalie was quiet. People who use systems to protect themselves from accountability, Calloway said. They count on the cost being too high for anyone else to keep pushing. And they're right, most of the time, most people stop. He turned his water glass in a slow circle on the table. But they run out of steam eventually. Because they're not protecting anything real. They're just protecting the fact of having gotten away with it. And that's not something you can sustain forever. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face that had been held very tightly for a long time shifted, just slightly like the first crack in ice in March. Not broken, but changed. You're surprisingly good company for someone I didn't know 4 months ago, she said. He laughed, an actual laugh, which surprised them both. High praise, he said. She smiled, not the controlled, measured expression he'd seen in meetings. A real one. Quick, a little reluctant, gone almost before it arrived. He thought about it the rest of the night. The second unannounced visit was in March. Dr. Poulin arrived on a Saturday morning, which happened to be the morning after a minor disaster in the kitchen involving Theo's science project, a baking soda and vinegar volcano that had gone significantly more volcanic than anticipated, and a subsequent team effort to clean the counter tiles at 11 o'clock at night. There was still a baking soda residue on the backsplash that nobody had gotten to yet. Dr. Poulin looked at the backsplash. She looked at Theo, who looked back at her with the expression who understood consequences. Science project, he said. I see, said Dr. Poulin. She conducted her interview with Theo in the living room again. Nathalie sat in the kitchen. Calloway made tea. When Dr. Poulin came in to speak with Nathalie, she set her clipboard on the table and said, I'd like to speak with Theo's teacher, and with you and Mr. Reeves together at our next scheduled meeting. There are some questions I'd like to address directly. After she left, Nathalie sat down. She wants to speak with us together. I heard that's either very good or... It's fine, he said. She looked at him. You don't know that. No, he agreed. But I think it's fine. She picked up her tea, set it down. Looked at the window. Why do you keep doing that? Doing what? Not panicking. She said it like it was slightly suspicious, like competence under pressure was something that required an explanation. Every time something shifts, you recalibrate, you don't spiral. He thought about this. My wife used to say I was constitutionally incapable of existential crisis, he said. She meant it as a criticism about half the time and a compliment the other half. There was a silence, the good kind, not empty but not demanding anything from either of them. What was she like? Nathalie asked, carefully, like she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. Moira? He picked up his tea. She was the kind of person who remembered what everyone ordered at a restaurant. Not as a trick, she was just actually interested in what people wanted. She noticed things. He paused. Iris has that from her. Theo reminds me of her sometimes, the way he pays attention. Nathalie looked at the doorway where Theo had disappeared upstairs. He's been different this winter, she said quietly. Lighter, I don't know how else to say it. Like something that was wound too tight got a little room. He's a good kid. He's the best person I know, she said simply. Then she picked up her tea like she hadn't said it, and they sat in the kitchen in the March morning light, and neither of them needed to say anything else for a while. The formal meeting with Dr. Poulin was on a Tuesday in April. She asked them, sitting across from her in the neutral beige office of the Family Services building on Queen Street, how long they had known each other, how the household arrangements had come together, and what they each understood about Theo's emotional needs. Calloway answered the household question honestly, that he had come to work for Nathalie in a professional capacity, and that the arrangement had grown into something that served everyone in the house, including Theo. He didn't perform warmth. He didn't oversell. He told the truth with the same quietness he brought to everything, and he watched Dr. Poulin's pen move across her notes with the steadiness of someone who has nothing to hide. When she asked Nathalie how she would describe Calloway's role in Theo's life, Nathalie was quiet for a moment. He's the first adult, other than me, she said, who Theo has trusted without needing to be convinced to. She paused. My nephew doesn't extend trust easily. He has reasons for that. And watching someone earn it without trying to, without making a project of it, without needing anything back, she stopped, looked at her hands. That matters to me more than anything I could say in a meeting. Dr. Pullen wrote something down, looked up. Mr. Reeves, if the living situation were to change, say, if the professional arrangement concluded, what do you anticipate your relationship with Theo would look like? Calloway looked at her. The same, he said. He knows where I live. The board meeting happened on a Thursday in late April. Calloway wasn't there. It wasn't his meeting, and Nathalie hadn't asked him to come, and he respected both of those things. He picked Iris up from school, picked Theo up from his after-school program, made pasta for dinner, and sat on the back porch after they'd gone upstairs, listening to the water. Nathalie came home at 9:15. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and he could tell from the way she was standing that it had gone the right way before she said a word. They rejected Gervais's petition to the board, she said, and his legal team sent a letter this afternoon indicating they're withdrawing the family court challenge as well. She stood very still in the doorway. It's over, Calloway said. Good. She came and sat in the other chair on the porch. The water was dark, and the lights across the arm were doubled in the reflection, and neither of them spoke for a while. I owe you more than a job, she said finally. You gave me a job, he said. A real one. You don't owe me anything, Calloway. She said his name like it meant something specific. Don't do that. He looked at her. Don't make it clean, she said quietly. Don't make it into a transaction that balances out neatly. Because it isn't. She looked at the water. 4 months ago, I sat across from you in a restaurant, and I offered you an arrangement, and I want to be honest with you. I thought it would be useful, and I thought I could manage it, and I thought that was all it needed to be. She paused. I was wrong about that. He thought about the kitchen at midnight, the science project. The moment she'd said he's the best person I know, and then picked up her tea like she was afraid of having said it. Me too, he said. She looked at him. The porch light caught the line of her face, the jaw, the dark eyes, the particular careful expression of someone who doesn't extend trust easily and has reasons for that and is doing it anyway. I don't know what this is, she said. Neither do I, he said. A pause. The water moved. I'm not particularly good at, she started. Neither am I. You interrupted me, I know. He didn't apologize. I just didn't want you to talk yourself out of it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, the job is a real job that hasn't changed, I know. And I'm not easy. I've been told that fairly consistently, Nathalie. He said her name the same way she'd said his, deliberately. I've been doing the work for 4 months. I know what the job is. There was a silence, the real kind, not the absence of words, but the presence of something that didn't need them yet. She looked back at the water. There's a restaurant on Barrington Street I've been meaning to try, she said after a while. It's supposed to be very good. I never seem to have anyone to go with. I like restaurants, he said. I know. You study the menu. That's called being prepared. It's called overthinking. It really isn't. She smiled, the real one, the quick, reluctant one, and looked at the water, and Calloway looked at the water too. And somewhere upstairs, Theo and Iris were doing whatever it was they did at 10 o'clock on school nights that sounded suspiciously like not sleeping, and the lights on the arm held steady in the dark. And it was, Calloway thought, a very ordinary moment, which was the best thing it could have been. There's something worth saying about what happens when the legal documents are filed and the board decisions are made and the evaluators finish their reports and go home to their own lives. The world tends to notice the drama, the crisis, the hearing, the verdict, and forget the part that comes after, which is the part that actually takes the longest. Theo slept through the night without waking for the first time in years on a Thursday in May. He told Nathalie about it at breakfast, matter-of-factly, the way children report facts that mean everything and know it. Iris finished the wall hanging she'd been weaving since November and gave it to Theo. He hung it above his desk without being asked. Calloway stayed. Not because the contract required it. The original terms had been met, the arrangement fulfilled, but because the job was good and the house on Fenwick Street had, at some unmarked point over the winter, become a place where he knew where things were, and people were glad when he came in the door. That mattered. He'd learned not to take it for granted. Nathalie told him, on the restaurant on Barrington Street, on their third dinner, that might have been called a date, but that neither of them was in a hurry to name that she'd found her daughter. He looked up from his menu. She'd had a daughter at 22, she said quietly. She'd been very young and very alone, and her family had insisted on an adoption, and she had not been strong enough then to fight them. She had not talked about it. For 25 years, she had not talked about it. But she'd found, through a provincial adoption registry, a woman named Claire, 25, living in Vancouver, studying landscape architecture, who had reached out 6 months ago, and then waited to see what Nathalie would do. "I called her," Nathalie said, "in February. At midnight." She looked at her hands. "She sounds like someone I would want to know." Calloway thought about the night he'd found her in the kitchen in the dark, reading the articles of Gervais's legal challenge. February. Midnight? He'd thought she was reading about the lawsuit. He said, "I think you should tell Theo." She looked at him. "He's old enough," Calloway said, "and he's going to notice when she comes to visit. Because she's going to come to visit." He said it with the same certainty he'd brought to "I think it's fine," the kind that wasn't certainty at all, but was something that stood in for it in the moments when it was needed. And he notices everything. Nathalie looked at him across the table in the restaurant on Barrington Street, and for a moment she looked like someone who couldn't quite believe that the world had arranged itself this way. That she was sitting here, with a person who said true things carefully and didn't need her to be uncomplicated, in a city she'd chosen because it was manageable, in a life that had turned out to contain more than she'd planned for. "He does," she said. "He really does." They left the restaurant at 10:30. The street outside was cool and bright with early summer, and they walked the long way back to Fenwick Street without discussing it, through the neighborhood where the old houses lined up close together and the lights were on in the windows. And someone a block away was playing something slow and soft, on a guitar they couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the courtroom that mattered. It wasn't the board meeting or the filing or the evaluator's report with its formal language and its binding conclusions. Those were the scaffolding. That was the part people saw from the outside. What mattered was a 10-year-old boy who slept through the night in May and told someone about it at breakfast. A wall hanging above a desk. A phone call made at midnight in the dark to a stranger who had her mother's voice. A child who'd learned, one ordinary evening in a kitchen that was not his own, that strange was exactly the right word for what grief left behind, and that someone else knew the shape of it too. What mattered was a man who walked out of a hospital in November with a box of his things and a daughter who asked if the house was nice, and found out a winter later that it was.